One of the ways that people tend to connect with their land and with each other tends to be through the art of that land. And I think that's one small purpose of art, which is to cement civilization, to root more deeply civilization through shared understanding and deeper shared emotional habits and reactions. And I'm very glad to see that the government's anti-extremism prevent program agrees with me there, because I read that they've issued guidance saying that the complete works of Shakespeare, Milton's Paradise Lost and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales are the marks of an extremist, and something to be very suspicious of, I guess. Things that people are to be weaned off of, and perhaps eventually things to be stamped out. I think that they confirm me in my view. All the more reason to read it. They're idiots, they won't achieve it, but that's what they want. And they are right that in England art is expressed pretty overwhelmingly through words, through the written word, literature, poetry, novels and plays. And so partly for that reason, I think it's appropriate for me to start talking about poems a little bit, and partly also I just like it, so I'm going to do it. And what I'd like to begin with, the one I'd like to begin with is this poem, Ozymandias. Let me go to that poem, if you can see that, Ozymandias. Now, what I want to talk about is really two things. Now, I'll follow with the cursor. I've prepared one already here with a few notes. And I want to look at two meanings, two ways of reading this poem, and two ways that I think Shelley meant it. Percy Bysshe Shelley. Silly name, that middle name. The first meaning is within the tradition, a really fine, admirable, good tradition of poetry about the futility of power. We see that in Shakespeare, in Macbeth, in Hamlet, in Henry IV, a little bit. And the second reading, the second meaning that he goes on about, that he talks about, which I think this is the deeper, more powerful meaning, the one that I enjoy more. That is of the artist as the king of kings, the artist as the dictator, as the ruler. Okay, what I'd like to do, if I begin by reading the poem, and then I'll go through these notes and try and go through some guidance. Okay, Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Okay, that's the poem. Now, three questions that often get asked about this poem, and I think they're the right ones, are firstly, why did he choose a sonnet? And what does he do with that form, the form of the sonnet? Secondly, why did he choose a ruin? He at that time, he appears that there had been a craze for Egyptology at the time. Napoleon had brought back monuments from Egypt, and I think some pharaoh's tomb or a statue of a pharaoh had been brought back to Britain and exhibited in London, and that wasn't a ruin. That wasn't the shattered pieces. That was an intact piece. So why did Shelley choose a ruin? And thirdly, why does he use reported speech in this poem? Because he actually, I think he uses three levels. The poet talks in reported speech, then the traveller, there's reported speech, and then the epitaph, that's just reported speech. So it's like Russian dolls, reported speech within reported speech within reported speach. Now, I think those are the right questions. Those are the questions that get asked. Now, if what I want to do is I want to go through this twice. First of all, looking at the first meaning, which is about the futility of power, and then go through it again, looking through the red meaning. So the first meaning is in green, the second meaning is in red. So dealing with the first reading, this is in the tradition of Gray's elegy, "The paths of glory lead but to the grave," a really good tradition in poetry. That's one of the features of English poetry: a constant scepticism, a kind of sharpness, a slight sourness, a detachment from power, a view that it is impermanent and ultimately futile. You get that running throughout English poetry, English verse, English literature. The second feature of English poetry that tends to pervade it is the factor of a tough realism which underlies and underpins and supports the simple lyric grace that overlays it. Often very simple words, one-syllable words, very often a preference for that, and a kind of a smoothness, a lyric grace that is palatable because it is undergirded by realism, clear-eyed reasonableness. Okay, so and those things are on display here, in particular the skepticism about power. So and that feeds into why Shelley used a sonnet. What I want to look at here is why a sonnet. Now, if a sonnet, the traditional form of a sonnet is a 14-line poem. The English sonnet or Shakespearean sonnet, it goes, the first 8 lines, that tends to be the main point of view, the thesis, and then the next 4 lines, that's the opposite point of view, the antithesis, and then the last 2 lines, you get a rhyming couplet, that's a synthesis. So that's the way it tends to be shaped in those blocks. And then the rhyme scheme tends to follow that. You get A, B, B, C, D, C, D, then E, F, and then G and G. That's the rhyme scheme that tends to pervade English sonnets. And what Shelley does here is he takes that traditional established form of literature and he undermines it. So if you look at it, I met a traveller from an antique land who said, all the way down to "Look on my works, ye mighty in despair." That is one whole sentence, one whole 11-line sentence. And it particularly, that quote, the 9.5 lines, that quote, that is one long sub-sentence with a snaking meaning and syntax. And so it really, you get what's called, the literary term, the posh word is enjambment. That means running over the line. But you also get it running over the form. It goes beyond the 8 lines, the traditional 8-line format. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 8 lines. You don't get an end of a sentence there. The end of a sentence possibly is after the word appear, which is after the end of the 9th line, or the end of the 11th line. So he's undermining the form. He's taking this traditional form of the sonnet and then he undermines it. He doesn't quite trash it, but he vandalizes it. He cuts it about. He slashes it about, and he does that with the rhyme scheme as well. You look, if you can see that. A, B, A, and then B, or that's a half rhyme. Frown doesn't really rhyme with stone. Shelley was a genius. If he wanted to find a word that could rhyme with stone, he would have found it. If he didn't, it's because he didn't want to. He's kind of playing fast and loose with the rhyme scheme. Then back to A again. So you get 3 A's and 2 B's. Then C, then D, then C, then E, then D again. Then E, that's a half rhyme, does despair rhyme with appear? Not really. Then F, then E again, and then F. No rhyming couplet at the end. That rhyme scheme, it undermines the form. And also the syntax of that sentence. I'll read it again because it's confusing. This is the off-putting thing about this poem, and it's deliberately off-putting. Nothing in this poem, I don't think anything in this poem is done by mistake. Every word tells. What is off-putting is the sort of the fact that it's difficult to discern the precise meaning of this long sentence. 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, On the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Now, it's difficult to get that meaning, particularly that line. That is the key line. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, particularly that word mock. But I'll come to that in a minute. What he's doing is a bit like he's showing Ozymandias, this all-powerful despot, and then undermining him, showing that his power has come to nothing. In the same way, he's doing that with the monument of the sonnet form. So he's undermining expectations. He's undermining our sense of authority and tradition. What he's also doing, and I'll come back to this when I get to the second meaning, the red meaning. What he's also doing is he's actually concealing. He's hiding under a veneer. He's hiding what I think he's hiding what he really means here. And again, it is in that sentence, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, that just doesn't appear to fit. It seems to, initially, it doesn't appear to relate to anything. So that's why a sonnet. Now, why a ruin? Well, so that he can say, look at this all-powerful man. Now you see this here. I met a traveller from an antique land. Okay, that's like it's an antique. He could have said ancient or far off or olden, or he could have found a different word. Antique is a kind of exotic word. This means that it's really a land of imagination. It's so far off, so far back in time that it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. And similarly with the ruin. Two vast and trunkless legs. It's kind of ridiculous, slightly comical. In literature, people's legs are often used as sort of something to mock, really. And these trunkless legs just sticking out of the desert, it's kind of comical. And they stand in the desert, and then there's a violent language. They're shattered. They're not just slowly eroded or worn away or decayed or the worse for wear. That violence has been done to them. That violence, under this first reading, that violence has been done to them by the inevitable, the inexorable passage of time. It's a shattered visage. And then the passions which yet survive, the passions survive, but the passions have been stamped on those lifeless things. And the lifeless things are the bits of rock that form Ozymandias' statue. So what he's doing is he's really pointing out the futility of power. Ozymandias performed such massive deeds and believed himself to be the greatest despot of all time, and yet he's just come to a bit of a ruin. It kind of the poem, if you read it on that first reading, it kind of undermines itself, because the only thing that remains actually under this first reading are the words of Ozymandias. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. His passions, which are carved into the rock. If those passions are Ozymandias' passions, and which is the case under this first reading, those passions remain, and his epitaph remains. The artist is long gone. Everyone else is long gone, but Ozymandias remains. So it's kind of ambivalent about power. It's as if Shelley is saying, well, there's something permanent about power, which actually I don't believe that Shelley believed that, not from his life, but that's again, that's why he's using a ruin, to undermine the idea of power, perhaps to be ambivalent about it. Now, why reported speech? Now, whenever you get reported speech in a poem, in a play, what you should prepare yourself is there's going to come a point in the middle that packs a punch, where the mask slips and the actor or the author is just addressing you bluntly, directly, and saying, this is what I mean, this is what I want, this is what I'm doing. And again, so you get the poet, I met a traveller from an antique land. He's kind of talking in a first person. In a way, that's kind of reported speech. Then you get the traveller, that he is his speech is reported, and then you get the epitaph. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look at my works, ye mighty in despair. That is reported speech, and that is where the mask slips. That is Ozymandias shouting out across the desert, I am all powerful, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. That is the culmination of the poem. And I think under this first reading, where Shelley is talking about the futility of power, I think he's saying that Ozymandias' cry there, it is futile because no one is listening. And the reason the reason I think that is because the following lines, after that long 11-line sentence, what you get is a 3-word sentence, nothing beside remains. So there's nothing there, and there's just a colossal wreck. Again, this huge, great nothing. It's a negation, a huge, great negation. And boundless and bare, the lone and level sands, this sandy wasteland stretches away. And time, in particular, the sand is often a metaphor for time, and it is here. Time has passed, everyone has forgotten about you, your boastful epitaph has little meaning. And I think this is what Shelley here is saying in that first meaning. And that, again, it is unlocked. What unlocks this poem and reveals that in particular, what gives it a buzz on this first reading, is that word mocked, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. Now the word mock, that has 2 meanings. It can mean to create a first draft, a mock-up. So a printer or even a sculptor will mock something up, but it also means to ridicule, to make fun of, to belittle, and that is Shelley saying that the artist's hand mocked Ozymandias at the same time that he was creating Ozymandias' statue, and that word mocked there, I think that unlocks the poem, and it shows the ridicule that Shelley's actually going further than a lot of futility of power poems go. He's actually mocking and ridiculing power there. So that even as Ozymandias sat for the statue, the artist was mocking him, and that's the idea. And then we see it at the passage of time as just buried Ozymandias' deeds, and his boast doesn't look all that impressive now, although he's still around and we still know about him. So that is the first reading. It's about the oblivion and indifference on the where nothing beside remains, of the desert. So that's it. And on that basis, that first reading, that says that this Ozymandias is a really I would say, if I just do that, I think that says that Ozymandias on that first reading is a really excellent poem, a very good addition to a really good tradition of English poetry, of being so sceptical and undermining of power, really just seeing it with quite a sour, sharp, clear eye, knowing it's just going to pass. This guy, however much of a big guy he was, the most he's going to be is a footnote in history. He was obsessed with it, he worked himself to death to it, really doesn't leave any footprint in the sand. So, and that's, English poetry is very sigma male. It's not alpha male, largely for that and other reasons. If you want to be a sigma male, read English poetry, memorize Ozymandias, because that is the character of English poetry. Okay, so let me go back to the poem, and then we'll look at the second reading. Now, the second reading, if you remember that is the artist as the King of Kings. So it is not Ozymandias who is the ruler. It is not Ozymandias who is the dictator. It is the artist. And I think it is not overdoing it to say that in fact Shelley is saying, I, Percy Shelley, I am the King of Kings. I am here in this poem stamping down my authority. If you want an image for this reasoning, it's the image of the King of Kings, but it's also imagine that shattered visage, the shattered face of Ozymandias. Imagine Shelley putting on his Regency boots and stamping on the face, or the carved face of Ozymandias. Okay, so I think this is a much more exciting reading, and I think it brings the poem together much more tightly and gives it much more of a buzz, much more of a charge. So let me go through that second reading, that second sense, that second meaning, and I'll do it with those three questions again that get asked about this poem. Why a sonnet? Well, again, as I said, it's a traditional, well-established form, and Shelley undermines it. And he does that effectively, again, through the syntax, the sentence structure, and the rhyme scheme. But what he's also doing here, I'll read this again, is he's creating some confusion in order to sort of hide, to create a lot of wiring under the floorboards, to hide his real intended meaning. And this tunes in with his assertion that poets are the unacknowledged legislators. So they are legislators, they are rulers, they govern, they dictate law, but they do it in an unseen way. And I think he's making his real meaning. He is keeping it hidden in an unacknowledged way. So, but it's necessary to go through the syntax of this sentence to explain this. Now, near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. So any reading of this poem, it comes back to that line, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. Under the first reading about the futility of power, that line just doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't seem to relate to anything. It's talking about two things, two nouns, but there's no verb. What are they doing or what's being done to them? It just says the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. So piecing it together, what is it that is doing something or possesses or owns the hand that mocked the carvings and the heart that fed? Well, if I read it again, that would be the wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. I think that is saying that the passions which the sculptor reads are the hand, the mocking hand, and the feeding heart. That is the artist's desire to his trade in mockery, his skill in mockery, in mocking power. And also, I think the heart that fed, that's not the heart of Ozymandias. It's not Ozymandias' megalomaniac heart. It is the hungry, sort of egoistic heart of the artist, a sort of greedy, driven heart of the artist. The artist's drive, almost like a kind of sex drive that the artist has. This urge to create, it feeding off its own creation. And so, I think what you get there is this assertive artist saying, reading the sculptor reading his own passions. Tell that a sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamps on those lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. Those are the passions, and the sculptor has read those, and he has then stamped them onto the relics that depict Ozymandias, and that is what remains. The statue itself doesn't remain, but what shows, what you can see of it, is the passions that the artist read, and the passions are the passions that the artist had, his desire, his skill in mockery, and his sort of hungry, feeding heart. And that is why I think, and he uses the form of the sonnet, I think, in a way to conceal that, because by sowing confusion. So it's very easy to skate over that line. the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. But I think that unlocks the poem. It unlocks that second meaning, which I want to come to. In a minute. So that's why the sonnet, and that's also why the ruin, because he's actually not. I think he's going further under this reading, this second reading. I think he's going further than saying it's a ruin. He's saying there's a total obliteration of Ozymandias, except for what the artist stamped on that statue. So, well, you have the two vast and trunkless legs of stone. That's meaningless. That's no monument. That's just ridiculous. And then you have the half-sunk, shattered face, the shattered visage. That shows nothing. I mean, there's very little there. All it shows is the frown and wrinkled lip and the sneer. That's which reflect the passions of the artist. So that basically that's all that remains, the passions of the artist, and nothing else remains. And again, those words there, nothing else remains. They come alive under this second reading. What I think it means is that there's just the artist's statement and nothing else. There's just decay. The wreck is just a colossal wreck. It's just decay, and around it there's just this flat wasteland, this desert wasteland. And so that's why that's the purpose to which he puts the ruin under this second reading. Now, and the third question then is, why does he use reported speech? And this comes alive under this second reading. If you think that it is the artist who survives and the artist's intent which survives, and not Ozymandias' boastful megalomania. And so again, I'll go through it. You have the poet, and then the traveller, and then finally you get the epitaph. If that word mocked, and that line, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, if that unlocks the poem, the crescendo of the poem, the point where the mask slips and you're getting a very direct, forceful, blunt statement, like placing the flag in the ground, that is the epitaph there. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. So that is, on my reading, on that second reading, that is the artist saying, I am Ozymandias, I am the King of Kings, and my works cause the mighty to despair. And Shelley here is being deliberately provocative, deliberately assertive, aggressively assertive. He's being deliberately blasphemous. And the King of Kings, that from Scripture is Christ. Christ is the King of Kings. Shelley is. I think this is Shelley letting the mask slip and saying, "This is not Ozymandias. It isn't actually even the sculptor. It is me. I, as an artist, I am claiming this title of King of Kings." He's trying to shock there, and to make a very harsh assertion of his own power. And Ozymandias, it's been pointed out that this poem has Christian references to it. Ozymandias, I think he was. Technically, Ozymandias was Ramses II, the pharaoh, but some people thought at the time that Ozymandias might refer to Herod, who had he has I think a ruined tomb or a ruined monument in the desert, pretty much half buried in the sand. So and Herod was the person who went the ruler who wanted all the firstborn killed in the Old Testament. So this is Shelley being deliberately blasphemous, as he was throughout his life. He was an atheist. He got kicked out of University College, Oxford, for publishing an atheist pamphlet. So he was an atheist. He didn't believe it. And I think he's trying to shock here. And I think he's... the reason he's doing that is to say, you think that rulers rule, but I have the blasphemous opinion that you rulers who think of yourself as gods, You don't rule at all. I'm the one who rules. I am the one who legislates. And I want to deal with. I want to come to a tract that he wrote called "In Defence of Poetry." Now, if you see this, that's "In Defence of Poetry and Other Essays" by Shelley. I just want to go down right to the end. I haven't read the whole thing, but he makes some very... It's often quoted that he talked about poets being the unacknowledged legislators, but he made much bigger claims for them. He said they are... Hold on, give me a second. Yeah, he makes some pretty hefty claims. So if you see here, but even whilst they deny and abjure, they are yet compelled to serve the power which is seated on the throne of their own soul. He's making a pretty big claim to power for poets. And down a little bit further, poets are the hierophants. A hierophant is someone who communes with the divine or unlocks the mysteries, the sacred mysteries. And the poets are the hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration, the mirrors of the gigantic shadows which futurity casts upon the present, the words which express what they understand not, the trumpets which sing to battle and feel not what they inspire, the influence which is moved not but moves. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. So he claims an awful lot of power for poets. It's wrong to think of Shelley as this fey, slightly girly warbler who's going on about what do these kisses mean if you kiss not me, and the Victorian gentleman Victorian epicene youth might use to try and seduce someone. He's not that at all. He was a genius, and he knew it. And his wife, his second wife, never married. He died young. I think they'd been married for 5 or 6 years, and then she never married again. And when she was asked why she'd never married again, she said, well, once you've been married to a genius, you don't want to be married to anyone else. And he was a genius, and he knew it. And I think that unlocks his character. If you want to know about Shelley, one book is this book by Paul Foot. It's out of print now, if you can get hold of a copy. It's really good. This was from a time when left-wing people were concerned about facts and reality, and weren't just tub-thumping idiots. And what he shows is Shelley as being a very energetic, really quite aggressive and self-assertive individual. And the theme that Paul Foot says about Shelley is that he hated any kind of forced constraint, and he was the enemy of that. He wouldn't tolerate it in his own life. You could also read the opposite point of view comes from this fella, and that's Paul Johnson, Intellectuals. He has a chapter about Shelley where he talks about Shelley basically being a bad guy and not fit to moralise or lecture anyone, particularly a bad guy in his personal life. He left his first wife and child, ran off with Mary Shelley, and then ran off with someone else and wasn't very faithful. And I think most of the children he had with Mary Shelley died. So he says he was just not a very nice person. I actually think it comes kind of in between. I think Shelley knew he was a genius, and he was dedicated. He had the artist's ruthlessness about his art, that the art came first, he was going to serve it, and everyone else around him was going to serve it as well. And I think that was his view. And I think he thought that because he thought poetry was so important, and you can see it there in that defence of poetry, the unacknowledged legislators of the world. So I don't think it is going too far to say that Shelley, where he talks, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty in despair, that is Shelley and not Ozymandias speaking. In particular, and I think I can add to that, but by saying, look on my works, ye mighty in despair, rich, powerful people don't want other rich, powerful people to despair. They want other rich, powerful people to gain more power over the rest of us. They want themselves to be a class of supermen, untouchable. They don't want them to despair. What rich, powerful people want other rich and powerful people to envy them, to crawl to them. He could have said that. He could have found a word that said that. It would have been easy to find one that rhymed with despair or appear. It's a half rhyme anyway. So he could have found one. But look on my works, ye mighty in despair. I think that is Shelley saying, hey, all you powerful despots, tyrants, megalomaniacs, look at me, look at what I do. I will undermine your power. Artists like me will bring your power down to nothing with the passage of time. Your power will fade, art remains, and the art will undermine you. There'll be nothing left of you. So you powerful people, look at me and you despair, because all of this power that you're dedicating your life's work to, that will come to nothing because of me, because I am the unacknowledged legislator. This is a highly assertive poem. When you see it in that light, it becomes much more exciting, and everybody, and I would say it has far fewer flaws, much better shape, much tighter shape, where every word tells, and you can see why he chose certain devices, certain words, why he chose such an extreme ruin to write about, and the way he plays with the syntax, where he's hiding his meaning, and the way that reported speech suddenly comes forward so skillfully to pack a punch. Now, I think that's one to memorize. It's a good example of an English poetic genius. Shelley was a genius. I am an anarchist. I think that means that I will be on the winning side during the fierce little bout of history that we're about to enter into. But Shelley, he is a freedom-loving poet, and that means that he will be on the winning side every time, for all time. Thank you.